Over the Garden Wall is a tiny 10-episode miniseries released way back in 2014 by Cartoon Network. I would have been about 10 when it first came out, but for whatever reason, this strange Gothic Americana-infused cartoon has stuck in my mind over 10 years later. Last year, creator Patrick McHale celebrated the 10-year anniversary with a 3-minute stop-motion short which served as a brief but welcome return to the unknown. McHale told Inverse that perhaps the series should have been released in stop-motion all along, and without a second thought, I found myself agreeing. Something about the medium of stop-motion fully lent itself to Over the Garden Wall, and I had to take a step back to consider why. The original art style is hardly lacking. Over a decade later, I can still easily recall so many beautiful and eerie frames on command. I mean, look at it. Why would you want to swap that for anything? So why did I instantly agree with McHale? But yes, actually, Over the Garden Wall and stop motion is the perfect marriage. The answer, I believe, lies in the way both have the ability to unsettle the audience in ways that they can never quite put their finger on, to make us aware that something is wrong but never sure exactly what it is, to push the boundaries of what is allowed in children's media. The answer lies in their relationship to the uncanny. You've probably heard of the uncanny valley, when something looks almost human but not quite. The more general idea of the uncanny was popularized by Freud, the weirdo, and one of his key examples was things that appear alive but are really dead, or vice versa. In their thesis for Anglia Ruskin University, Dennis Crawte rightfully identifies the natural link between this undead form of uncanniness and stop motion. Stop motion subjects are constantly stopping and starting, their movements only temporary sparks of life before returning to the stillness of death. This liminality between the world of life and death affords them a uniquely uncanny quality. And in my search for an explanation as to what linked stop motion's uncanniness with Over the Garden Wall, this seems like a promising start. Whenever I thought back to this series over the years, one episode seemed to stick out to me more than any other. This was episode 2, Hard Times at the Buskin Bee. Wirt and Greg are stranded in the, yeah, he's called Wirt. I don't know why he's called Wirt. Wirt and Greg are stranded in the unknown with little explanation, and now accompanied by talking bluebird Beatrice, they wander into a town called Pottsfield. The town seems strange and abandoned, but Wirt insists they can get help. They do finally find the residents all gathered together for a dance, but um the residents of Pottsfield are all wearing pumpkins on their head, and as well as the surface level weirdness, this costume lends them a certain lifelessness. While their bodies move just like anyone else's, their carved pumpkin faces remain completely still. Despite their beaming smiles, they betray no real emotion, reflecting nothing of the person wearing them. There's a constant tension in these characters between the lively movement of their bodies and the deathly stillness of their faces. I'm sure you're already seeing the connection between this and the already discussed tension between life and death found in stop motion. It makes sense that if this tension creates an uncanny effect in stop motion, then it should do the same here. This is only heightened when you consider the big twist of the episode. Wirt and Greg are made to dig some holes in the field, some seemingly innocuous farm work. In fact, Wirt actually finds the work quite relaxing and even considers staying in Pottsfield, until Greg discovers something while digging: a human skeleton. Wirt panics, realizing with horror that they've been made to dig their own graves. He tries to talk his way out of the situation. He tries desperately to remove his shackles, anything to avoid the deadly fate that awaits him. But he's wrong. He hasn't been digging his own grave. He's really been digging up the newest resident of Pottsfield, as we discover that each member of the town is really a reanimated skeleton wearing vegetable costumes. Now the visual liminality between life and death becomes more visceral, a town full of half-dead, half-living pumpkin creatures. What's more, the show as a whole can be read as a sort of Dante's Inferno-inspired purgatory for Wirt and Greg. They fall into a river, experience the unknown, and when they defeat the beast, they're seen being pulled out of the river and back to the land of the living. So, we have our answer. It's the liminality between life and death that gives Over the Garden Wall its stop-motion style, uncanny atmosphere. Except we only found out the purgatory thing in the penultimate episode. Until then, we have no idea why these kids have ended up in some magical forest. So, despite some foreshadowing, such as the Pottsfield resident telling the brothers they're not quite ready yet, its effect isn't really felt throughout the series, whereas the uncanniness is. There is still Pottsfield, but while I stand by what I've said about episode 2, it's only one episode. This town and its people never show up again besides a brief moment in the epilogue, so their effect, while never fully gone, can't be solely responsible for the uncanny atmosphere. I guess technically this lantern is also kind of undead, but that doesn't count. Although liminality is still key to the link between stop motion and Over the Garden Wall, to really discover the reason behind their similarities, we have to dig deeper. Writing for the Humanities journal in 2016, Kristiana Willsey noted that the show received criticism at the time for its often paper-thin plots. She gives the example of episode 5, when after a full episode pursuing money, Greg throws away the coin they earned and remarks, "I got no sense." It's worth noting that this action comes completely out of nowhere and renders a significant portion of the episode's conflict entirely meaningless in one moment. It completely undermines the kind of plot progression we would expect from a story like this. The expected moral resolution is also discarded. Brothers initially intended to steal them, egged on by Fred the talking horse, but instead they help an old man and earn the penny they need, creating the kind of moral lesson expected from a kids show. Stealing is bad, helping people is good, and by helping someone, the boys now have the money they need. But in one random moment, Greg throws all of this away. These kind of absurd non sequiturs are found throughout the show. In episode 3, the gorilla who's been pursuing the characters all episode is revealed to be the schoolteacher's lover stuck in a gorilla costume, instantly resolving the episode's conflict. If you haven't seen the show, I swear that's what happens. In episode 6, the dreaded witch Adelaide is defeated completely by accident when exposed to the night air. She's been being teased for several episodes by this point as a terrifying presence, and is defeated in a second by a weakness which had never been mentioned before or even foreshadowed as far as I can tell. Typically, this kind of writing would just be called lazy, and you could say that this part of the video is just me trying to convince myself that the thing I loved as a kid was secretly genius rather than badly written. But Kristiana Willsey would seem to agree with me. She described the narrative in this as a strategy rather than a thought, one which emulates the morally ambiguous nature of the folk or fairy tales from which it is clearly drawing inspiration. I agree with Willsey that this is a strategy, but I think it leads to another effect, and it's linked to the liminality of stop motion. What these flimsy, absurd moments create is a subtle awareness of the constructed nature of what we're watching. Every time something absurd happens, especially an ending that subverts the way we expect the narrative to progress, we're made subtly aware that what we're watching isn't real, but a story. By subverting the expected moral or narrative convention, it draws attention to its own artificiality. It isn't breaking the fourth wall. Greg never turns to the camera to deliver a Deadpool style quip to the audience, but it does just enough to create a more subtle kind of awareness. This leaves us in a kind of liminality, and is this liminality playing within the fourth wall rather than breaking it, which creates the special atmosphere of Over the Garden Wall? Another part of Crawte's argument for the uncanniness of stop motion is the liminality that comes with the medium due to its very obvious artifice. Whilst the constant stopping and starting of stop motion does resemble a jolt into life followed by lifelessness, it also constantly reminds us that what we're watching is not real. But again, it never fully breaks the fourth wall, never provides the kind of relief that would come from a full acknowledgement of artifice. The effect created by stop motion's artificiality is similar to that of Over the Garden Wall's absurdism. Absurdism doesn't automatically equal uncanniness, and not every episode shares this same level of narrative bizarreness. But this kind of semi-reflexivity isn't limited to narrative subversion or absurdism, it's baked into the form of Over the Garden Wall. No one example alone is responsible for the atmosphere, but a combination of these factors is what leads to the effect I've been talking about this whole time. Basically, everything about this show is extremely stylized to the point that it becomes impossible to fully forget that what you're watching is something fictional. The art style, as I've been showing throughout the video, is incredibly exaggerated compared to other shows of the time. Being a miniseries helps the show massively here. In a world of mass-produced children's cartoons that couldn't afford to spend too long on art direction due to the need to move on to the next episode, Over the Garden Wall can delve deep into a single frame, devoting attention to every detail. It also has a completely different style to most kids' cartoons, trading bright, friendly colours for a dark autumnal aesthetic. The result is an art style dripping with artistic flair, despite a relative simplicity. The backgrounds blending Gothic and Americana styles beautiful. Take this frame, for example, where Wirt and Greg traipse through the woods towards an all-consuming heavenly light. Shots often look more like a painting than a typical cartoon. Even when the art isn't especially beautiful, it's so exaggerated and stylized that it leads to some of the same subtle reflexivity mentioned earlier. The aim of the art style isn't to immerse, it's to impress and put a Brechtian distance between the audience and what they're watching. This kind of extreme stylization can be found all over the show. The music, diegetic or otherwise, is often very pronounced and intentionally drawing attention to itself. Several vocal performances, especially J.K. Simmons as the Woodsman or Sam Raimi as the Beast, are incredibly dramatic.
Beware the unknown! Fear the beast, and leave these woods!
Elijah Wood and Colin Dean's more relaxed performances as Wirt and Greg only serve to draw more attention to the exaggerated ones. All of this combines with the previously mentioned narrative absurdism to create a series in which nothing feels quite real. In true Brechtian style, the viewer is never allowed to become comfortable in their immersion, instead constantly unsettled and made to search for something more beneath the surface. So, between the narrative absurdism and extreme stylization, we have a Brechtian show that never breaks the fourth wall but plays within it in a liminal fashion. But for me, it's the next factor that pushes Over the Garden Wall into truly unique territory. The true uniqueness of Over the Garden Wall lies in combining these other traits with its status as a children's horror show. As I mentioned, this miniseries already stood out amongst its contemporaries due to the stylization, but another trait that made it stick out like a sore thumb is the elements of horror. Throughout their time in the unknown, Wirt and Greg traverse several eerie environments, but even more noticeable is the monsters they encounter. They typically remain concealed for most of the episode, only to rear their ugly heads by the end, shockingly horrific for a show airing on Cartoon Network. The first dose comes in episode 1, as this dog bares its teeth at the innocent Greg, glaring down with bioluminescent eyes and fatally sharp teeth, its mouth stretching sickeningly all in close up. By episode 7, we have Lorna, who, after appearing as a normal girl for most of the episode, transforms into a terrifying spectral creature silenced only by an ominous bell. Her eyes give way to gaping pits holding thin blue irises, shadows cast down her face, and uneven teeth jutting out from her ghastly grin as she's enveloped by darkness. Rewatching as an adult, these moments admittedly aren't as bad as I remember them being, but they still go way beyond the realms of a typical kids show and completely contrast some of the show's more childish tendencies. This is a trait it shares with a lot of stop motion, which tends to lean towards horror whilst retaining its status as kids' entertainment. And I think that what makes this kind of horror so uniquely unsettling is the constant nagging feeling that the show is breaking some sort of unwritten rule. Kids shows aren't supposed to be like this. Cartoon Network isn't supposed to be this creepy, and yet here Over the Garden Wall is. As a child, I felt like I was watching something that I shouldn't be. In a way, it makes the show feel like more than a show, more real somehow, as it reaches through the screen to make us feel like it's doing something it's not supposed to. You check the channel and see, yes, this really is Cartoon Network, and inevitably you reach the question, how far will they go? The horror seems to escalate, starting with the dog, then the folk horror creepiness of Pottsfield. By episode 7, we have Lorna, the creepiest monster yet, and so by the finale, the viewer wonders how terrifying the villainous beast, who has stalked children throughout the series as little more than a silhouette, will turn out to be. Like the absurdism or stylization, it contributes to a consciousness within the audience that what they're watching is a show, the kind of separation that actually leads to a deeper involvement. The viewer urges the show to push further, but is slightly worried what will happen if it does. Again, this is all heightened by the fact that most viewers will be children, whose exposure to horror is likely minimal at this point in their lives. This makes everything that bit scarier and adds to the feeling that they're seeing something they shouldn't be. I think this is the most inherently uncanny of our three factors, and the one that makes Over the Garden Wall feel truly unique in a way I've only seen achieved elsewhere by stop motion. But all three factors are necessary to combine and create this uncanny cocktail. The absurdism and stylization create the awareness of form found in stop motion, catching us within the tension of the fourth wall without ever providing the relief of breaking it, making us unsure what exactly feels wrong, but sure that something does. Once this is achieved, we have the horror aesthetic. This contributes to a surface level creepiness which is important by itself in shifting the consciousness into more unsettling territory, but becomes something even more due to its presence in a kids' show. It creates a sort of self-aware horror that feels forbidden and therefore exciting, but also unnerving in a way rarely achieved outside of stop motion. It is this unique and unusual relationship to horror, children's media, and the fourth wall that has meant 10 years later I still feel the need to write over 2,000 words explaining how this show made me feel a lifetime ago.